everyone. I wanted to let you know that we have a few guests this morning. We have BB Bailey, Jean Bell's friend, and we have Giselle Lanneman, Sam's friend, and my husband Kern is watching as well, but he won't be on video at all. So he'll be with us as well. So that's great that we have some guests with us as well. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Marianne Call as she introduces our distinguished guest speaker. Okay. All right. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, great. Our speaker this morning is Evan Mallet, the chef owner of the Black Trumpet in downtown Portsmouth, one of our great restaurants in a city of fine dining. Evan's got an interesting and long background, but I'm not going to share it all with you today. What I do want to make sure you recognize is that he is a 4-time James Beard semifinalist for Best Chef in New England in 2011, 2013, 2014, 2017, 5 times, 2019, I think.
And it's actually, sorry to interrupt, but it's 6 now.
Oh, excellent. Oh, that's great to hear. So, and in addition to being recognized for his work in the kitchen repeatedly by this very esteemed foundation, the restaurant also won in 2020 the Best Hospitality Award for the nation. So that is not only a great honor to him, but to the people that work with him and in the restaurant. But today he will be we're also very lucky that in addition to being a great chef and running a wonderful eatery, he is very involved in the community, particularly in helping us understand our relationship to where our food comes from and how it gets to us. In that vein, he has helped to create the Slow Food Seacoast Movement group, the Chefs Collaborative, the Heirloom Harvest Project, and he works with Gather as well. And it is on those topics that he will be sharing his knowledge and experience with us today. So without further ado, take it away, Evan.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you, Nancy, for inviting me to participate, and happy almost Thanksgiving to everyone on the call. I'm gonna do my share screen now, which I think you have to enable first, Nancy. Nancy, you're on mute. Okay, great. Here we go. And go to slideshow. Here we are.
Excellent. I'm going to keep myself on mute unless I have to speak because there could be noises in the house. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Just with a show of hands or thumbs, can people let me know that they can see the first slide okay? It's got a scary image. Okay, great. Sorry to shock you with my first slide, but what isn't shocking about the year 2020? So we're gonna lead off with, as I walk you through the history of Black Trumpet, we're going to land on 2020, and most of what we're going to be talking about, or what I'm going to be talking about today, is turning what can be viewed as a silver lining of this pretty horrible year into a silver coat. So we're going to try to take that silver lining, turn it inside out, and wear it into 2021 with some great achievements that have come in the face of great adversity. So as we come from the title slide here of how a pandemic could save our food system, you'll see that it's the relationships that I'm going to be talking about and where they're headed from here that might provide that path to progress rather than setting us back. So on that slide, you'll see 3 happy symbols of the work that we've done at Black Trumpet. One of them is sustainable and humane animal husbandry. I bet you can guess which picture I'm referring to there. The other is wild food foraging. And those are my daughter's hands when she was about 8 years old, foraging elderberries, a very salubrious, wonderful medicinal plant that I'm sure many of you have grown or are familiar with, and happens to also have antiviral properties. Not that it's the cure to COVID, but just happens to be a great medicinal and delicious plant. And finally, you'll see some Roma or plum tomatoes. Those are paste tomatoes that we will be talking about shortly from a program I did with a local food pantry called Gather. So just a quick background, as we went into this year, we were coming off of 13 years of good business. We had established a reputation for Black Trumpet as a local food sourcing restaurant. And in the year that we opened, 2007, there was not a lot of that going on, much to my shock and disappointment. So we went into 2020 with that reputation. And the first setbacks we had were we had to replace 2 air conditioning units and an exhaust system, which are all very, very pricey infrastructure changes to the restaurant. And that's how we greeted 2020. And then, of course, on our 13th anniversary, March 15th, we were told by the governor that we were going to have to close our restaurant for indoor dining, which set all restaurants into a tailspin, many of whom have never recovered from that. So back in March, as I say here, many experts predicted that restaurants would be the hardest hit nationwide, worldwide, really. And with a few notable exceptions, they were in fact correct, as we now are seeing the attrition of so many great restaurants. Some of them had been institutions in their communities. So we're trying to keep Black Trumpet from being one of those statistics. So going back to the underpinnings of Black Trumpet, there are a lot of words here that you can read while I'm talking, but I'm not going to just read them back to you. What they are here to say is that with that farm to table movement in its infancy, we met with some surprising resistance, and it's not like that kind of thing now seems in any way controversial or radical even. Because the truth is that prior to World War II, the notion of being a local food sourcing restaurant anywhere in the world wasn't shocking or controversial. And our food system changed radically in the course of the 50 years between then and modern day. And we at Black Trumpet believe that a closed loop food system that sources locally is a much more sustainable and safe way for us to think about how we feed ourselves. So it's one thing to be a restaurant that is considered fine dining. It was never my intention for Black Trumpet to have that stigma. And I do think of it as a stigma because our message was always bigger than the very small percentage of the population that chooses to dine in my restaurant. But by virtue of my curiosity about ingredients and some of the esoteric techniques, dishes, and ingredients that we work with, we alienated ourselves right up front from what I'll call the steakhouse mentality. Part of that meant by sourcing local ingredients, the meat proteins and the seafood, in order to build a stronger food system that reinforces the hard work of our local farmers, we had to pay top dollar for those ingredients. And the real cost of food worldwide is dependent on us recognizing that those animals that provide our meat proteins are sacred and they should be expensive. And therefore we should be putting a small amount of them on the plate rather than that 16-ounce T-bone or ribeye that you find American restaurants tend to glamorize or fetishize. And that is why we have a lot of our dietary problems in this country. And I'm not a nutritionist, but I can expound on that notion if anyone wants to talk about it. At the end, we will have a little Q&A, and we can delve into why Americans think the way they do about, the center of the plate protein, as we call it in our industry. And Black Trumpet has made an effort to downsize that thinking and to retool the way we look at a plate and what's on it, with a mind toward not only the sustainability of our food system, but also the health of our consumers. So as I say here, there are three organizations whose logos you see at the bottom of the page here, who were really instrumental in taking me from this position I was in as an idiot savant in a food movement, who just had a simple belief that we should be working together within a community rather than having a giant semi deliver, my toilet paper and my eggs and my meat from all over the world. So that was not an instantaneous process. It involved a lot of coaching and shared best practices from chefs around the country who were like-minded. And a lot of that information came to me from the organizations Slow Food and Chefs Collaborative. So let me take just a moment to walk you through. I'm sure many of you know at least one of these institutions. Slow Food International was founded by a man named Carlo Petrini in the 80s. He was a politician in Italy who witnessed the construction and establishment of the Golden Arches at the foot of the Spanish Steps in downtown Rome. It's a major historical landmark. If anyone here has been to Rome and you've been to the Spanish Steps, you've perhaps seen the now very small Golden Arches that were ordered to be minimized after Carlo Petrini began his crusade to prevent this idea of fast food, as we call it here in the States, from taking over an ages-old institution of celebrating slow food and appreciating where the ingredients come from, knowing your farmers, knowing your fishermen, and knowing your chefs. So Carlo Petrini really built a foundation of people all over the world who shared that vision of returning to a sustainable and revitalized local sourcing food system. Meanwhile, Chefs Collaborative approached me in 2007 when Black Trumpet opened and said, we noticed that you're sourcing a lot of your food locally, and we'd like to support what you're doing and highlight it for our network all over the country. And I thought that was pretty cool because I really wasn't thinking beyond, how to keep my restaurant afloat in a community that didn't really necessarily understand what we were doing right out of the gates. So it was comforting to learn that there were chefs and farmers and really thinkers all over the country who were working on establishing systems that were like the one that I was thinking about. So I ultimately became a board member of Chefs Collaborative, a national organization. And we did a lot of work over the course of the 6 or 7 years I was on the board to try and build more sustainable foodways. And then locally, I joined the Slow Food Seacoast board. That's our local chapter. It's on hold during COVID. Both of these organizations had to hit pause because a lot of our work is hands-on and interactive and assembling in large groups. So there hasn't been a lot of activity there. If you are curious about either of those organizations, you can go find their URL and look them up online. They are tremendous, and they certainly need lots of support, both financially and just people looking into their message and spreading the word. And finally, James Beard Foundation. So in the beginning, you heard Marianne talk about the Best Chef Northeast Awards. So those are given out every year, or they were pre-COVID, given out every year to chefs all over the country, and it's broken down regionally. And while it sounds a little boastful for me to be talking about it, and I appreciate that Marianne led with that intro, so it doesn't sound quite as boastful, but the awards really recognize something more than having artful plates or coming up with interesting flavor combinations. A lot of the things that you see being celebrated about chefs tend to have to do with personalities, and on the other hand, the sort of visual effect of a menu item that a chef creates. So I find that James Beard Foundation is looking, and always has been looking, at a much deeper criterion for giving those awards, and that encompasses all of the efforts that go on behind just designing a menu or a dish. It has to do with how you treat your team. It has to do with how you fit into the community and what messages and stories your restaurant tells. So a lot of the chefs who have been given those awards really stand for something much more than what you might see in the 2 dimensions of their menu, or even experience by eating their food. So to get those awards was really amazing. But as Marianne said, the real icing on the cake for us in last year was to be nominated for the Best Hospitality Award for James Beard Foundation. And people talk about James Beard as being like the Oscars of the food world. And for us to be on the stage with some of the best restaurants in the country, and in some cases in the world, was a huge shot in the arm and a reward far greater than anything I could have received as a chef, because it speaks to the amazing, I guess it's like the personality of our restaurant, really. It's the human beings who have been with us since the beginning. We have several people on our staff who've been there for all 13 years. And we are family, certainly, but we are also committed to making the dining experience something extraordinary, and to provide a level of comfort and pampering that, I will be talking later in this presentation about how I think we need to broadcast that beyond our industry and be thinking about that as a technique for healing as we look forward to what comes next after the pandemic. So one of the first things that we did in working with Chefs Collaborative and Slow Food, when Slow Food approached me and Chefs Collaborative said, "What can we do for you?" I said, "Well, I have this crazy idea, because all of our chefs in our community are very tight-knit. We love collaborating. We love working together, just cooking together, and usually for some kind of cause." And it was a couple of years before this that Hurricane Katrina struck and devastated the coast of Louisiana. And we had a lot of friends who were impacted by that because of, as you know, New Orleans is a well-known food mecca. So I had chef friends there. A lot of my chef friends here had chef friends there. So we did a benefit at the Wentworth Hotel where we collaborated, and it built the foundation for all of us to have to understand the impact that chefs working together can have on a community, to help raise money, to help raise visibility. And we used that, we leveraged that when I was approached by Chefs Collaborative to create this thing. So my wife and I, along with a farmer who had a farm in Stratham with a beautiful barn, and the people at Slow Food and Seacoast Eat Local, Seacoast Local, and Seacoast Growers Association. So those are all what we call the 4 food groups. They all formed in 2006 when there was this nexus of energy looking at our food system and ways that we could help restructure it. So they all came about at around the same time. A lot of really intelligent, hardworking friends of mine came together in those groups, and when I said, hey, I want to have a party in a barn and I want to cook with all my chef friends, they stood up and said, let's make it happen. So sort of faded in the background on the slide here, you'll see us getting set up for one of our barn dinners. The barn dinner became an instant success. And we had the first year, I want to say 7 or 8 local chefs that were each cooking a course. And we charged $100, and it was like a white tablecloth staff of 80 people bringing the food out and cooking with a cocktail hour under a tent in the backyard. And this event evolved over the course of 10 years to grow larger and larger. We would then have tables sort of running out the back of the barn and multiple tents, and I think we were up to 18 chefs who were all contributing. So it was really quite a powerful thing that Yankee Magazine and other New England-based publications put on the cover of one of the magazines, and it appeared in several other journals. So it really sent a message to a lot of people in our community and outside of our community that this collaboration between farmers, chefs, fishermen in some cases, and consumers was a really, really great way to begin a conversation about how we might rethink our food system and build a stronger, more impactful, vital food system in our region. So we did that for about 4 or 5 years before we realized that sort of like my restaurant, Black Trumpet, catering to 1% or something close to that of the population, the barn dinner was catering to people who could afford that high ticket price for the experience of there's quote unquote celebrity chefs from our community cooking for them. And it had its own mystique and grandeur, and it was beautiful, but it was exclusive. And so we got together as our steering committee who created the barn dinner, thought it through and said, we need another event. We need something that is going to draw more people from all walks of life who will get this message, which I skipped right over, by the way. So the message of the Heirloom Harvest Project and its mission was to promote biodiversity and build a stronger food system by connecting chefs, consumers, and farmers and fishermen. So at the table, we would have interspersed with all of the paying guests, many of the farmers who provided the food and raised the ingredients, and all of the vegetables that are served at these events are heirlooms by the definition that they predate World War II and have been seed saved in a single location for multiple generations. And each of those exists in New England and everywhere else as a testament to the importance of our heritage, to our history, and the resiliency of those ingredients despite very difficult growing conditions and climatic conditions that, as we know, being hardy New Englanders, it makes it really hard to grow food sometimes. So these heirlooms all have amazing stories, and one of my favorite ones is Roy's Callus flint corn, which is a beautiful variety of corn. That is, some of the ears are bright yellow, some of the kernels are bright red, and some are interspersed. But it's milled into some of the best cornmeal that you can find in New England. But no one had really heard of it when we started Heirloom Harvest Project. And now we have several farms who grow that out. And some of that corn is now ground to make the masa for tortillas at Vita Cantina. A friend of mine, David Vargas, is the chef there, who is a very creative guy who works a lot with local food. And so we've built through Heirloom Harvest Project a lot of those connections where chefs represent their culture or their heritage and history by using these commercially unviable, or at least virtually extinct ingredients. The Roy's Callus flint corn, the backstory there is that in the 1800s, there was a volcanic eruption in Europe that cast a ash cloud over all of North America, but most impactful, most critically, northern New England. So Maine, Vermont and northern New Hampshire, for that year, it was called the year with no summer. It snowed in all 12 months of that year. And it's like a blip in history. Very few people know about it, but there are a handful of staple crops that survived that year and people were able to harvest and turn into food. And one of those was Roy's Callis flint corn. So we tell stories like that through Heirloom Harvest Project that we think, you know, without talking about the modern version of apocalypse brought on by COVID, you know, there was, prior to that, a lot of fear about a monoculture or monocrop apocalypse. It's really hard to say. With what's been happening with genetic modification, you know, expunging a lot of biodiversity in favor of these cash crops that were, you know, single varietal ingredients that would make, for example, the best French fry for McDonald's, or the best feed corn. And a lot of the heartland of our country has unfortunately been transformed into monoculture producing farmland. So Heirloom Harvest Project, in its little corner of our little corner of the world, has rallied to try to make that message clear that we need to promote biodiversity to strengthen our food system. We also, at Heirloom Harvest Project, began at Strawberry Bank with a raised bed where I was able to plant and nurture just a few ingredients that first year. And then we transferred to the back of the farm where we had the barn dinner. We were given a plot there that was probably 30 by 70 feet, which was, you know, decent size for us to grow to. And then ultimately that scaled to where it is now, where we have 3 satellite gardens growing heirlooms that we've seed saved over the course of our tenure at Heirloom Harvest Project, with 3 different gardeners who babysit those crops and do an amazing job keeping tabs on how they do in various years with different climates or different, you know, wetness, for lack of a better word. So if we have the year like we just had with a terrible drought, some crops are going to do better than others, and we keep a log in each of our gardens about how each of those crops perform, so that for future generations you'll have a handbook or a diary that would be useful in projecting how those things might do in a particular season. So on the screen here, you'll see people sitting down at one of our barn dinners, and below that, we are dispatching a heritage breed duck that we had an on-farm slaughter, and we've done this a few times. It is a difficult thing to participate in, and it's not for everybody, but most chefs that we work with in our community are eager to understand what that process is like. And if you are ever part of the process of slaughtering an animal for food, you have to have the mentality that that is a sacred experience. The transformation of life into food is absolutely sacred. So back to what I was saying earlier about how Americans think about meat. I said in my book, which I'll have a picture of coming up here in a minute, that I believe firmly that people have to be able to look their food in the eye and know that that living thing has made a sacrifice to be on your plate. And if that's not okay, then I think that person should be a vegetarian. And if there were more of us who were vegetarians, it would certainly be better for our world and arguably for our bodies as well. And we can get into that in more detail later. So another program that we came up with, and this is unrelated to Heirloom Harvest Project, is Take a Bite Out of Appledore. And this is after a few years of Black Trumpet being in existence. I was approached by a scientist named Jen Seavey, who is the executive director of the Shoals Marine Lab. For those of you unfamiliar with the Shoals Marine Lab, it is located on Appledore Island, one of the Isles of Shoals, 6 miles offshore. of the mouth of the Piscataqua River. We look out at them from the beaches in Rye and Kittery. And I, as a child, had visited my grandparents who lived in Rye, and we would go to the beach and I'd look out and see those Isles of Shoals. And I was always just, it was magic to me that those were out there. And I'd always dreamed that someday I would go out there. My grandfather, when he was growing up in Portsmouth, actually rowed a boat out to the Isles of Shoals and back on a dare from a friend. And so I had those stories in my head when Jen Seavey approached me, and Dr. Seavey is a remarkable human being who thinks way beyond the immediacy of her work as a research scientist and a marine biologist to think about how her work can integrate and does integrate necessarily with other work in our community. So she reached out to me and said, what can we do to work together where you can tell the story of food history and our, incredible history on the island of Appledore? And I looked into it and I said, let me get back to you. So I looked into it and I discovered that a woman named Mariah Parloa, who I hope all of you will look up. Her book is the third slide over on the top row here of my slide. And that photo is on top. It's her book positioned on top of my book. My book is called Black Trumpet. I always forget the subtitle. It's a chef's journey through 8 New England seasons. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. But right now, my book in this photo is just propping up this amazing work of a cookbook. It was one of the first cookbooks in the United States. And Mariah Parloa is a name that has been unfortunately lost in history, but I've made it a crusade of mine to try to get people to recognize that she, as an orphan in what is now the Library Restaurant and formerly the Rockingham Hotel, used to be an orphanage, and she was an orphan there and was later, I think, relocated to Boston and then came back and was living on Appledore Island, where the Appledore Hotel ultimately was built. And you're probably familiar with Celia Thaxter, who did a lot of amazing painting out there and became a host for a number of other writers and artists. So Appledore and Star Island both have a rich history, not only of just this sort of rugged landscape. There was a murder out there, many of you may have heard about, and books have been written about that. But nothing really has been written in any historically accurate way about Mariah Parloa. The Appledore Hotel was an institution out there in the era of grand hotels. All of those things are sort of buried now, but we tried to bring that back by featuring at this event, Take a Bite Out of Appledore, tributes to Mariah Parloa. So the gist of this is that for 3 days on Labor Day weekend, I go out with a local horticulturist named John Forty. I believe he's spoken to you before. Is that right, Marianne? Just a nod. Yep. John Forty is a very good friend and also a former board member at Slow Food Seacoast. And John and I went out to the Appledore Island and did a survey of wild foods that are there. Some of them have been introduced by various gardens, including Celia Thaxter's famous garden on the island, which still produces an amazing array of things, including a variety of hops that's very difficult to find. So she was enjoying her own brew when she was out there. But we did a survey of the island. We found it was rich with life and rich with great food sources. So I went back to Jen Seavey and I said, Jen, I can totally see this coming together where we have an educational 3-day program on the island where the scientists from Shoals Marine Lab can talk about the marine life and about the life on the island. So there are botanists as well who do terrestrial foraging and studying some of the plants out there. And Shoals Marine Lab is funded by University of New Hampshire and Cornell. So there is a constant flow out there of students and professionals and scientists who are all doing various kinds of research. So it's a very stimulating place to be, which also, as you can see by some of these slides, is naturally breathtaking as well. I've got a sunset and a sunrise depicted there. So for my part, what I wanted to do was do some foraging in the water, which meant scuba diving and snorkeling with the guests who pay to be part of this program. And we were able to forage things like oysters, mussels, a lot of crustaceans and periwinkles and seaweed. And seaweed was always a popular one because we all know that seaweed is good for our health. It's good for our diet and is little understood. So this gave me an opportunity to team up with the very first chef on Shoals Marine Lab when it opened in 1970. And his name is Sam Hayward. And you can see that of the two men bent over plating food in the bottom right of the screen, the one who has hair is actually Sam Hayward. The other one is me. But Sam is about as much of a mentor as I have had in my culinary career. He is the chef and founder and owner of 4th Street in Portland, Maine. But his very first job as a young rock star in Portsmouth in 1970 was to be the chef of the then new Shoals Marine Lab. So his heart is very close to that program and that island. And when I called him up and I said, Sam, I just found out your first job was at Shoals Marine Lab and I want to do a thing out there. And I explained to him what we were talking about, and I didn't even get through the first sentence. And he was like, let's do it. It sounds great. So I got to cook with my mentor, Sam Hayward, out on the island and bring some cooks from my kitchen, one of whom in particular went on to become the chef at Shoals Marine Lab for a year or two, actually, after we did our first program there. And now he's my sous chef at Black Trumpet. So it's a really great legacy going on. On the upper left of the screen, you'll see we've got some mackerel that we caught off the docks on Appledore, and we served that on our menu for the first night of this 3-day extravaganza. The second slide there, you'll see our apples that were introduced to the island, we think, over 200 years ago. And that tree that came from that particular year was bursting with delicious fruit and really distinct tasting. And we've since done some DNA mapping to figure out what variety it is. And John Forty is the only one who knows the answer. I'm not sure why he's coveting that information, but he must be up to something. So you'll also see a couple of the dishes that we put together on that program. And hopefully when this COVID episode is behind us, we will be back doing Take a Bite Out of Appledore. So stay tuned for that if you know people who are adventurers and who love food and want to know more about the history of that island. Another initiative that came from the relationships that I had built with farmers was called Abundance. And Abundance is a for-profit business that ended up not being very profitable. But the reason it's not profitable is we saw an opportunity in the throes of creating it to bridge the gap between food insecurity in our area and food surplus on farms. So this is a really popular thing to talk about now, but when we were first addressing this issue 5 or 6 years ago, people had no idea what we were talking about or that there was a food waste conundrum at all. The farmer depicted here is Josh Jennings of Meadowsmirth Farm, originally in Stratham and now in Southampton. Josh is one of my best friends, and the quick backstory of how we met is that he and his then wife, Jean, were farming in Stratham during what people might remember as a fairly devastating hailstorm that came through and decimated his entire tomato crop before the tomatoes had ripened. And they were a tomato farm, like that was their chief harvest. But nature harvested it prematurely for them. So he showed up on my doorstep with a bushel of green tomatoes and said, you know, with tears welling in his eyes, like, what are we gonna do? And I'm over dramatizing only slightly, but my solution was that I would reach out to the network of chefs that we had built through, the post-Katrina effort that we did, and deliver all of those tomatoes that had fallen on the ground to each of these restaurants to can as piccalilli, and there's a Croatian fermentation called tertia that I'm a huge fan of for its health benefits, but also it's super funky and delicious, and I love it, and it needs green tomatoes. So we did some research into all the things you could do with green tomatoes, and we're able to give some money back to the farm that would have lost their crop entirely. So that's how Josh and I met. And ever since we met, it's been an ongoing conversation about how we can help farmers in our area and help our restaurants as a byproduct of helping our farmers. So we go back and forth debating whether it's more important to save our farmers or save our restaurants, but he always wins because obviously if there's no food, we have no restaurants. So Abundance went about taking excess product, or in some cases ugly or lightly damaged goods from farms, and bringing them to a facility in Meredith, New Hampshire that is a canning, HACCP certified canning facility where we could turn the excess foods into soup.
So bad I had to go to my iPad.
Are you on camera right now?
Someone's unmuted.
See if you're hitting the Baileys this early.
No, I don't do that.
Okay. Anyway, so we turned all of those ingredients that were abundant into soups. And when we had our finished product, we thought there might be a market for that. But it took a lot of legwork on our parts, and we're both very busy. So we didn't really have marketing channels developed to sell the soups. So what we ended up doing was we were taking the soups to food pantries in our area. And that's how I initially established a relationship with a couple of providers at food pantries, including Gather. We'll talk about Gather in just a minute. So those are some of the programs that we have evolved through Black Trumpet that are not restaurant related per se, but they are related to building a better food system. And at the end of the presentation can answer specific questions about that, or after this call, maybe we can have like an email conversation if people do have questions about any of these initiatives. Now I want to come back to 2020. I've given you a little bit of the backstory and talk about what we did with our PPP money. So you've heard of the Payroll Protection Program. A lot of businesses benefited from it. We had the odd challenge of being one of the first businesses in our Portsmouth downtown to receive funding, which was forgivable loan from the PPP. And the initial guidelines said we had 8 weeks to use it. Well, we had 8 weeks to use it, but we had no restaurant in which to use it. So I had to put a staff to work that had no jobs in the restaurant. And that meant creating jobs for them that were peripheral to what they did at Black Trumpet. So our servers couldn't serve, our cooks couldn't cook, because there was no one coming inside to dine. And at that point, we had no outdoor dining yet. So we had to be creative and try to think through what we could do to provide jobs for our unemployed staff. And as you probably recall, the government was offering pretty handsome unemployment benefits to people at the outset. And a lot of other restaurants were disappointed to find out that their staff didn't want to come back to work because they could do better by sitting at home and collecting unemployment. So that was a bit of a snafu and a loophole, I guess, in what were good federal intentions. Here we have Ben Franklin wearing a mask. I couldn't resist. So we were given our money by the Small Business Administration, and we put it to work by creating these following bullet items, which you can read on the $100 bill there. House cleaning and home improvements merely meant that Black Trumpet is a 13-year-old restaurant in a 240-year-old building that required a lot of care. So we try to stay on top of that and keep things spick and span, but the infrastructure needed work. Even though we had just replaced our 2 air conditioning units and our hood system, there were still a lot of other little things that needed work. And 2 of our staff members were very handy. So we gave them a weekly task of coming in 1 day a week to redo our flooring, redo our bar. This was all being paid for by the PPP money, remember? So it was taking the strengths of each of our staff members and turning it into lemonade, which you'll see I make a reference to later. We went to a takeout and delivery system, which meant that some of our staff with cars could be delivery people. And we set up a system in our kitchen where we were basically just your local pizza place, but we weren't making pizza. And we were just delivering Black Trumpet food to people during our regular business hours. We employed people on the farms that we work with, and that meant people including one of the great gifts to Black Trumpet in the last year, a gentleman by the name of Andrew Call, who is Marianne Call's son. Thank you, Marianne, for sending him my way. He's been a great addition to our team. And Andrew and 3 other people on our staff had the opportunity to work in the dirt on the farms where our food that we buy for the restaurant is grown, including our own heirloom harvest garden that I referenced earlier. Body Lasagna was the name of our first band, and we created that band from the 3 people on our staff who had musical gifts and the ability to play fearlessly live, so that when people would come by for takeout on Saturdays, they would greet them with live music in front of the restaurant with a full PA system. And the first band was called Body Lasagna because one of our staff members kept describing what she was feeling during the early stages of COVID. She didn't have COVID, I don't want to start that rumor, but what she felt was body lasagna. It felt like layers and layers and layers of yucky stuff going on inside her. And so we named that band Body Lasagna. It also then, after that, would have a different name each week. But people loved the idea that they could tune in and eat a Black Trumpet meal while watching their favorite bartender and sous chef playing live. We created meal kits, and this was a really interesting adaptation that we're going to do again this year, starting in December, which is just a couple of weeks away. Meal kits gave us the opportunity to take Black Trumpet dishes, many of them from my book. And for people who had my book, they could follow along. But I would also enclose with the meal kits the recipe typed up and a URL that they could go to watch a video of me assembling the meal kit. So it was often either raw ingredients or things that we had minimally prepped that people would then have to make into a dish at home. And in the early stages, when the sourdough craze was going on, a lot of home cooks were eager to be cooking at home. So it was a really interesting experiment for us to help continue to maintain that connection to Black Trumpet for them. So as I mentioned, we did those videos, that's part of the meal kits, but we also did some how-to cooking videos that we will continue to do again in December. There will be a number of those, and we'll be publicizing them through our social media and email list and our website. So if anyone's curious about that, you can look those up. Also, we will continue cooking for Gather. I don't have pictures because it was just yesterday and I didn't have time to load them onto this presentation. But Monday and yesterday of this week, we produced 291 root vegetable casseroles made entirely from local ingredients and packaged them up yesterday and brought them to Gather, where they will be frozen and distributed to families in need for Thanksgiving next week. And that is the kind of stuff that started from our initial work with Gather during the PPP phase of the program, We were able to use a kitchen at the restaurant Atlantic Grill in Rye that was not being used. And those are called ghost kitchens. It's a popular thing going on around the country right now to use kitchens of restaurants that have either closed for good or that are temporarily closed. So Atlantic Grill was still open, but had a giant banquet kitchen they were not using because they weren't doing any they weren't doing any events, and are still not. So we're able to continue to use that kitchen even after our PPP money is gone, because Gather has funding to pay for my staff to continue to do the work of taking food that would otherwise be unused and putting it into meals that we can distribute for the Gather community. So as I said earlier, we're trying to make lemonade. This is part of that notion that we're going to take the silver lining and turn the coat inside out. For that 8-week period, we were able to keep our staff engaged with the PPP. And since then, we've done a few things that I'll talk about in a minute that have kept our staff engaged. It is increasingly difficult to do so as we now look at going back inside and not having the outdoor seating options that we've been able to create. But what's getting us through this is those partnerships, and you've seen some slides to show how important it is for us to build those relationships, because it galvanizes our community, and it makes it so that those of us who have worked really hard to build community are now on the receiving end of what that has created. So I'll read this one slide. When our front of the house staff greets a guest, they exchange knowledge about what makes Black Trumpet different, as well as what the guest has come to expect of their experience. This is an important mating ritual that begins a courtship we hope will last for years. Messaging and storytelling are big pieces of this equation. The same can be said for relationships we make with our greater community. By applying a hospitality ethic to our society, we can restore integrity, decency, and compassion. So I wrote this slide just for you guys, because I was thinking about what resiliency has meant for Black Trumpet, what it has meant for our community, but more importantly, if there's a lesson that can come from all of this work that we've done over the course of the last 9 months, isn't it that that hospitality award Black Trumpet was nominated for, and that ethic that we have put into that effort is a strong undercurrent that I would like to see be rebuilt in society as a whole. As we talk about divisiveness, and we talk about some of the warring factions, bipartisanship, a lot of hatred right now, after an election, I'm very passionately interested in seeing some of that integrity, decency, and compassion be restored. So a little out of chronological order here, but I think it's good to bring it up now as we talk about some of the survival tactics that we've had to do after the PPP money ran out. I wrote a letter that I submitted to our local paper, and to use an unfortunate term, it went viral. And a lot of people were very influenced by the message that I was asking. And the question is the headline that you see here: how will Portsmouth save its restaurants? And it sounds like I was crying because I was, and I was looking around and seeing what was happening in communities all around the world with restaurants being shut down, many of them permanently, and seeing the writing on the wall for us in Portsmouth made me react with a strongly worded letter asking our city to step up and form a commission or a task force that would address our small businesses downtown, not just restaurants, but obviously theaters were direly impacted, lots of other small businesses as well. And for Portsmouth in particular, it was important for me to note in this letter, perhaps more than any other small city like it, Portsmouth has created a restaurant scene that is so vibrant, it has become part and parcel of our identity. And all of our other businesses, to some degree, rely on that restaurant community attracting people from within and without our immediate city. So that draw, I felt, was at risk of disappearing with the restaurants that created it. So I asked the city to create a task force, come up with some solutions for outdoor dining. And what happened, much to my surprise, and it was slow moving and it was filled with all kinds of bureaucratic junk, but we were able to form a nonprofit organization called Pop-Up New Hampshire. Pop-Up NH was formed to help restaurants that did not have any outdoor dining options. I was, for Black Trumpet, one of the first people to apply for outdoor seating, but by virtue of our situation, the literal way we are situated on the street in downtown Portsmouth, I was one of the last restaurants to receive the certificate for outdoor dining. It just was a lot of back and forth with the city. There was some stubbornness on the part of the city, but a lot of it was just stuff beyond my control that had to do with the nature of Ceres Street. And without closing Ceres Street, which was not an option for a number of reasons, we had to cobble together a little space on either side of our front door to put 4 tables. And those 4 tables were able to generate a nice amount of additional revenue for us, but we needed more than that to get through the post-PPP money phase of COVID up until mid to late October. And what that was the Pop-Up NH task force that was formed in response to my letter, created a parking lot. And I was not asked to be on the committee that I called for, which was fine because I was too busy trying to figure out what we were going to do to survive. But the people who were involved were very smart and they were persistent. And despite pushback from the city, they eventually received permission from the city council to erect sheds in a parking lot called the Bridge Street lot, right smack in the center of downtown Portsmouth. And that allowed restaurants like mine who didn't have outdoor dining solutions to create basically a socially distanced, safe outdoor dining environment with picnic tables that were 10 feet apart from each other, and a live music venue that would also be a live theater. And that would allow a lot of our local artists who were performers, whether musical performers or theater performers, gave them the opportunity to also have some revenue. It helped our theaters, it helped our restaurants, and it certainly helped Black Trumpet get through those difficult times. I'm pleased to report that as of last weekend, all of our sheds, rather than being demolished, have been relocated to a parking lot outside of town where they will lay dormant until hopefully early next spring, when we won't have to wait for the bureaucracy we had to wait for this last year to reconstruct those sheds, put them back in a new location, or perhaps the same location, and have the sign off from the city that would give us a complete outdoor dining season to help us get through the aftermath of what we're going through right now. So with all of that said, I have to be looking now at the future of what we're going to do to get through this winter, what we restaurants and small businesses are going to do to help heal in this time following this winter. Just because the weather is going to get better doesn't mean that we're going to have indoor dining again. We are all suspecting there will be another closure, and we have to be prepared for that. So the same resiliency that we had to have in response to getting the PPP money but not having jobs is going to be applied to our future months, including continuing our relationship with Gather. Our primary priority is not going to be to think about Black Trumpet as a brick and mortar fine dining establishment that's won a lot of awards. We need to be thinking about feeding people first and foremost, and that there are a lot of people as we go through these next few months who are going to be food insecure, more people than there are currently for sure. And therefore, the role of Gather is more and more important with each passing day. So Black Trumpet's involvement with Gather will continue to be to produce meals and meal kits that we will be doing at Black Trumpet. We'll continue to work with Atlantic Grill as long as their additional kitchen is available. But we're also looking at other brick and mortar opportunities in some of those quote unquote ghost restaurants that I alluded to earlier. So there's going to be, I think, something good happening through that collaboration with Gather that I will be able to talk about soon. So hopefully you all will stay tuned. Here's what we've done with Gather so far. And you can see in these pictures examples of one of our production days. It was actually 2 days that it took for us to process 4,500 pounds of tomatoes. In this slide, I talk about it being 2,500 pounds, but I was corrected yesterday that it was actually 4,500 pounds of paste tomatoes, all grown on farms in southern Maine, southern New Hampshire, and northern Massachusetts. So that effort was our first seasonal effort. The second one was this week, producing those root casseroles for Thanksgiving. And we'll continue to do that kind of work. But you can see here some statistics about all of the work that Gather does. If you want to look into Gather and understand more, I highly recommend going to their website, which has been recently updated. So there's a lot of information you can find there that I don't have. But right now they're distributing 1,500 meals every week. They have a store on West Street, which is right off of, it's right behind the Market Basket on Route 1 or Lafayette Road in Portsmouth. That store has 350 members who come and get food at no cost to them. That is provided by local supermarkets. Chief among them, Hannaford, has been a great donor of ingredients when they are approaching expiration dates. They go to the store at Gather. As you probably all know, expiration dates are they're not a myth, but they are often very far from accurate when it comes to the spoilage of food. And they're mandated by our USDA and other organizations to ensure the safety of everyone with zero risk. So a lot of foods have expiration dates that way predate when the food will actually spoil. So a lot of that food is going to food pantries, and it has for quite some time, but Gather does a particularly good job creating a storefront where they monitor that food going out to families who need it. They also have mobile markets, which travel around to the areas of most critical need in our region. And those have been a huge success as well, because it allows people who don't have vehicles to have access to food that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. Gather also manages the New Hampshire Food Provider Network, which includes 63 food pantries around the state. That, as an administrative task, is significant, as you can imagine. So the infrastructure of just administration at Gather has grown significantly since its founding, and will have to continue to grow to accommodate the growing need for food. So we'll continue doing those seasonal events. We have some upcoming educational videos that we're going to be doing for people as well. And we're also seeing Gather creating jobs. My daughter had a internship at Gather over the summer. There are paid positions that are possible now because of the funding that's coming in. Gather and other food pantries are receiving funds, and that's really important when you think about where our priorities are right now, that a lot of people are having trouble accessing donation money, but Gather has been very successful in securing funds to help feed the hungry. So our vision going forward, working together, is to feed all people and thereby democratize our food system. It's a lofty goal, but it's one that I'm seeing already making a difference. So another program that we did at Black Trumpet was called Women of the World. And the first two pictures you see here are of two of our Women of the World. Women of the World was something I created at the beginning of this last presidential administration, when I sensed, and it didn't take a genius to sense, that there was misogyny and immigration at the roots of a lot of policy that was being made and a lot of rhetoric that I was hearing. And Black Trumpet has always been about celebrating diversity, not just biodiversity of food, but also diversity in our culture. And a lot of the dishes in our menu are influenced by foods that I've been inspired by through travel. Having lived in foreign countries, I also draw on those experiences on our menu. But I felt it was really important for us to highlight people in our community who are women, some of them business owners. And you can see Nadine, the second woman, a beautiful, wonderful, brilliant woman who owns Elephantine Bakery right downtown in Portsmouth. And they are producing some of the most delicious baked goods Portsmouth has ever seen. Nadine is from, her mother is Egyptian, both her parents are Egyptian, and wanted to be a part of this Women of the World program to pay tribute to her Egyptian culture and cuisine. So by doing that, we drew a lot of people into Black Trumpet who would not otherwise have come in to experience a different kind of food than we might typically serve. It also helped educate my staff on some styles of cuisine that they were unfamiliar with, and tell a story that hopefully our community listened to, because there's a lot of culture going on that we don't see every day. At least speaking as a European American male in his 50s, I look around downtown Portsmouth and I don't see a lot of diversity. So this was a way for us to really shine a light on some of the amazing culture that we have just under the surface. The third picture is just a gratuitous one of my son who made a dinner when he must have been 9 years old there. And teaching kids is a big part of the way forward as I think about education of home cooks and getting people to put food on the table for their kids that doesn't have to be a lot of work, but it might be outside their creative recipe book or their box that they think in. The next photo you'll see there is a gentleman by the name of Najee Brown. Najee is from Brooklyn. He is one of the directors at Seacoast Rep Theater in Portsmouth, and is also a playwright with a very amazing play called Bus Stop that I had the pleasure of seeing, and that's when we met. And I talked to Najee about what he thinks about diversity in our community, and he laughed at first and said that he loves Portsmouth. He lives in Elliott, but what he really wants to do is bring soul food to Portsmouth. So he asked if he could use Black Trumpet's kitchen to put together a soul food menu that would attract people to downtown who might not otherwise come into town for dinner. And I'm pleased to report that in the first week of December, we're going to do our first Savor the Soul event at Black Trumpet, which will be all pre-order takeout soul food made by Najee and me collaborating together, because I don't have a deep soul food repertoire. I'm learning in this process. My staff will continue to learn new styles of cooking, and we'll be telling our community a story again about diversity and the importance of recognizing everybody in our community. This smacks of desperation, but I also think the third way forward is to do everything we've been doing, all the things that I've talked to you about today, and to continue to amplify the message that we're doing all the work we can to get through this, and that we want to continue to build a stronger community as a result of everything that Black Trumpet has stood for, and all the hard work that all of my staff over the years have put in to help broadcast that message. Oh, there's one thing on this slide that I didn't talk about that I just want to touch on real quick, and that is Zero Foodprint, which is an organization started by a chef in San Francisco that is gaining traction all around the country. And this is calling on restaurants, even in this time of great need for restaurants, to donate a portion of their revenue. And it's not taking away from the restaurant, because we're asking for an additional amount to go toward meals that people purchase from the restaurant. That percentage, that margin of which would go to help create a fund that would go toward farmers who are practicing organically and it's the hardest word, regeneratively. And that Zero Foodprint Fund is now being built in our community by a group of farmers and chefs that are hoping to give that incentive to create better, cleaner food for all people in our community. So here we are, coming to the end of our program today, and I hope you all can share my optimism that we've turned the skull and crossbones from the first slide into a silver lining, and looking at that silver lining, that we might turn it inside out and wear our silver coat with pride. Using some of the highlights of the year, so that the silver linings included, as I mentioned, the huge donations that have been pouring into the hunger-based nonprofits in our area. The sales of food in local farm stands broke records. It shattered any records of what any farms have been doing, often selling out of product. It looked like a Russian supermarket in the 80s when I went into my local farm stand recently just to get some raw milk, and it was cleaned out completely, except for like a couple of turnips, because there's always someone who doesn't like turnips. So farm stand sales have gone through the roof. Farmers are doing okay. Farmers that depend on restaurant sales are doing less okay, but any farmer that's been able to rebound by offering a direct food source for people is doing wonderfully well. Local ingredients are being distributed through Three River Farmers Alliance. Hopefully some of you who live around here and want to source local food are aware of Three River Farmers Alliance and its Veggie Go program. These are incredible resources. And one of the farmers who built Three Rivers Farmers Alliance is Josh Jennings, who I showed you in an earlier slide, my co-collaborator and good friend. So look into Three River Farmers Alliance if you want to see hope for the future, or just get some really great locally farmed food in your refrigerator. We've seen in this year home cooks overcoming their fear of cooking. And I personally know a number of people who have gone from getting white sliced bread with no expiration date because it's full of preservatives in their local supermarket, to making sourdough every day at home. And there are a lot of those people who are on the other end of the curve now and who are like exhausted from cooking at home. But so I recognize that, and all of those people who are exhausted and who are on this call should definitely get Black Trumpet takeout. I couldn't resist a plug there. So as we see restaurants foundering, that's the gentle word to describe what we're doing right now. We have seen farms and fishing boats finding that direct access that I mentioned earlier, and really thriving. And I know one fishing boat in particular who sets up shop in Golden Harvest parking lot on Saturday mornings and sells out of his entire catch of cod and haddock. It's amazing. Also, one of the great shiny silver linings that I've seen is the number of citizen volunteers who have come forward to participate in all of these harebrained ideas that I and others have come up with, including our pop-up lot, which never would have made it without all of the volunteers who made it possible. All of the work we've done with Gather, including yesterday, I had 8 people who were not being paid to be a part of our production line show up to just roll up their sleeves, put their heads down, and help us make casserole. It was really a huge shot in the arm for me and for many others to know that we have that safety net. We have that flotation device of volunteers. So that brings us to the end. I actually haven't looked at a clock at all, so I don't know where we stand on time, but I do want you to think about this lovely lady in the center of your screen who is surrounded by scraps of vegetables that are exactly what we would turn into soup for abundance. And that's the message I want to leave you with, is the shiny silver coat and the woman who is rising out of the ashes, so to speak, turning a skull into flowers. E morte ad vitam is Latin for out of death comes life. So that's the positive note I'm hoping to end today with, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Okay. Evan, thank you so much. If everybody wants to unmute, we can applaud this gentleman for this wonderful presentation. A little bit archaic. Now, do we have any questions?
I
Okay,
have one
Ann,
quick question. Oh,
okay.
sorry.
Okay, we'll go with Ann first, and then raise your hand, and I'll come to the rest of you.
Okay,
ahead, Ann.
Ev, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Right at the beginning, you mentioned elderberries. And I had seen a recent inquiry on Facebook, and somebody locally on the seacoast said, where can I buy? I think they wanted the bush, the plant. Where could one source elderberries?
I don't have a simple answer for that, but I do have, well, there's one simple answer, and that is you can go to Wentworth or Rolling Green. Both of them have elderberry bushes there.
Okay.
But I've learned something fascinating. We clean our elderberries on my deck. And I'm lucky enough to live in southern Maine with a decent sized tract of land that backs onto a river. And that river, the riverbanks, despite some nasty work by beavers recently, is just lined with elderberry bushes. And so since we've lived here 17 years, I have harvested elderberries and elderflowers from those bushes and bring them back. And then we clean them on the deck. You saw my daughter's hands. That's what we look like after we clean the elderberries. And much to my surprise, after doing that for years, we now have elderberry bushes growing around the periphery. So it grows like a weed. It will self-seed. If you harvest the berries, a lot of them fall to the ground and regenerate. So it's a super easy plant to grow. It's a great pollinator. It's good for our health. I can go on and on about all of the merits of elderberry.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Okay, we have Heather. And then
Hi,
Giselle.
Evan, thank you very much. I have a couple quick questions. Is that John Decker's barn in Stratham?
No, that is actually the Saltonstall property on Stratham Heights Road. For about a decade and a half, we did our barn dinner there, and that's where my heirloom harvest garden was.
That's beautiful. I had a couple questions about some of the food ideas that you had. So the soul food, if we wanted to go online and order some takeout, we just go to your website, is that it?
Yes, you wouldn't find it there today, but hopefully by the end of this week, we're going to have information posted there that you can look into and pre-order.
Okay, and then the Golden Harvest, I'm always up for fresh seafood. When is the cod and haddock at the Golden Harvest? I've never heard of that, but that's a great idea.
So Tim Ryder is the boat captain who parks his truck there and sets up a tent. I haven't seen him there for a couple of weeks. It may have been a seasonal thing, but I would look into it. And then there's New Hampshire Community Seafood as well, which you can have delivered to your door through Three Rivers Farmers Alliance. And that's it's almost always haddock, but they sometimes have other species as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Heather, Giselle, you also had a question? You have to unmute. Okay, well, you have to unmute in order to ask a question. So, okay, there you go, Giselle. Go ahead. Oh, I'm still not getting you. Go ahead. We're not getting audio on you, Giselle. I'm sorry. So does anybody else have questions? Okay, Jean Bell, go ahead.
Hi, that was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
You're
Could you please spell the last name of Mariah
Yes, of course.
Parloa?
Yeah, I should have done that. Thank you. Parloa is Parloa.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going from screens to, okay, we've got Martha Lanter. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. It was such a wonderful talk. I just wanted to tell you, though it's not exactly local, my daughter orders from a place called Ugly Fruit and Vegetables. And what they are, they may be misshapen carrots or, misshapen squash, but they're still good food. So she gets a box every couple of weeks and she doesn't know exactly what's going to be in it, but they all have fun with it.
Where does she live?
She lives in Dover.
Oh, okay.
But she orders it online, and it's I think it's called Ugly Fruit and Vegetables.
Yeah, there was something like that in south of Boston. I wonder if it's that
It could be.
program.
It could be.
Interesting.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Jean Mullen.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank you very much for an interesting and eye-opening presentation. I sit here with no pen and paper, so I was wondering if our unflappable Holly Bauer could somehow maybe put the references in our news, or Jean Bell in our newsletter for, future reference if we wanted to look up and participate in those organizations that he has mentioned, that Evan has mentioned.
Marcia?
Well, I was going to suggest that since Nancy's going to post this, send the recording to Anne to post on our website, Jean, that you could also re-listen to it, because I'm not sure Holly was writing down everything. I could be wrong on that, but
That's a good suggestion, and I will so do it. Thanks, Marcia.
I did write down a lot of things, and I'll include the ones that I did. A lot of them were just because they were fascinating and I wanted to follow up on my own, but certainly listening to the recording would be great.
Okay, Nancy Andrews.
Evan, could you talk more about your own book, please?
Well, I happen to have a copy of it right here.
Just happen to have.
So Black Trumpet came out in 2016. It is a sort of uncreative sounding title, but my publisher is Chelsea Green Publishing, and they really wanted, I think, to highlight the stories behind the restaurant and our mission as much as the 270 recipes that we tested assiduously to grace the pages of the book. So there's a lot of material in there that is narrative, and my favorite feedback that I get from people is not that they found a recipe successful or interesting, but that they actually read through the like just endless drivel that I put on those pages from our experience. And, I hope that some of it is educational, but largely it was intended to be entertaining. And that, it's a fun book because it highlights the seasons so specifically that I still turn to it even as I'm like desperate to never do the same thing twice. That's just sort of my MO. But I continue to go back to the book for ideas that are just steeped in the heart of any season. And I think that's probably its greatest value to the home cook. I'd like to pretend that it's the narrative, but it's really what people can get out of it is, for example, an aunt last night who was on a Zoom call that is a weekly Zoom call in my family, held up a delicata squash and she said, "I've never seen this. What is this? What am I supposed to do with it?" And luckily, I have a history with delicata squash, and it graces several pages of recipes in my book. So that's the kind of resource I think it can be for people. And it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. It is available through Amazon and all of the remote mail order juggernauts, or I would love to see anyone in Portsmouth visit my friend Tom at River Run Bookstore, which always has an adequate supply of the book, and he could sure use the help right now. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. We have another question here. Just one moment. Whoops.
Me.
Okay, I just lost my screen for a moment. I'm sorry. Okay, BB.
Hi. Hi, Evan. I don't have a question. I just want to thank you so much for your presentation. I could say a lot of things about it, but what kind of came to mind for me is creativity with heart, hope, and community. So thank you.
Okay,
thank you.
that's awesome. Any other questions? Okay, Martha?
Yeah, sorry, just one other, Evan. You said you have your huge plot of land to provide vegetables for you. Do you have part of it being a greenhouse for like lettuces and stuff?
Only one of them, of the three, has any seasonal extension to speak of. We have one, there are barns where we can cure onions and squashes and things like that. But in terms of growth into the winter, we have one greenhouse at the Tuckaway Farm property in Lee. That is an existing farm that does just gangbusters, great work, not only in our local agricultural system, but also in nationwide food policy. The Cox family that lives there is a multi-generational farming family. I usually in a slide presentation have a picture of Chuck Cox, and I did not include it, but he is the absolute quintessential epitome of New England farmer and one of the brightest people I know. So that's where we have our greenhouse, to answer your question in the most roundabout way possible.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's see, Giselle is going to try again, I think. But unfortunately, Giselle, we cannot get your audio. And now the only other option, you could go to chat and type in whatever your question is, okay? Just go down to wherever you have chat on your screen. I see that we have a message there from Evan.
Yes, thank you.
If anybody has had the opportunity to read it, that's great. And Giselle, if you want to type something in, that would be great. And do we have any other questions? Jean, was that a raise of hand? Jean Bell? No?
No, it was, I wanted him to say something about River Run Books for his book, that's all. And he did.
Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, I'm going from side to side. And I don't see any more questions. And if Giselle has a question, she could put on the, I don't think she's able to put it on our chat. So, but at any rate, I want to thank you so much for your time. I want you to thank your wife, Denise, for, her patience and also her input. I believe that our wives always kind of help out in some way. And we really appreciate everything, all of your time. My next speaker is unable to make it, so that kind of worked out good with the time and everything. So, and I see we've got thank yous coming across on our chat as well. And let me see, is there anything else? I think we're good. Thank you. We will be posting this recording. And Evan, if you have any other questions or anything at this point?
Well, I just would like to thank you all, and to say that if people do have any follow-up thoughts, maybe Nancy or Marianne, we can have an email thread going forward where I can answer any of those questions.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you so much. We post our newsletter after the end of the usually just after the first of the month. So we might have something going out in that or something ahead of time, and we'll let you know. And we really appreciate everything. It was a great presentation.
My pleasure.
It
Thanks.
was. Okay, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.
Wonderful.
You're welcome to stay with us for the rest of our meeting. We're going to go into our general meeting now, okay?
Okay, I'm sure it's going to be exciting, but I do have a 10:30 engagement,
Oh,
so I gotta run.
okay, very good. All right.
Thank you
well,
all.
thank you so much.
Then,
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. All right,
thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Jean Bell, and hi, Heather Johnson.
okay,
Hi, BB.
okay, bye-bye. It was so nice to have some guests here with us today, too. That was great.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, BB and Giselle. And like I say, you're welcome to stay, but it might not be too much interest to you. Okay, very good. All right, I am ending the recording, folks. All right. Just give me a moment. All right.